So, welcome to the Conquer Risk podcast. Today, we're going to actually do a little extra before we start the real podcast. And I think part of this is because last week my podcast intro sucked so bad, I had to do it twice. So, we're going to do a little extra piece in front here. That little extra piece is one of the most common questions I get is about how do we find content? And this particular podcast is going to be a perfect example. You read an article, I read an article, you called me the next morning and laughed and said, "Have you seen this thing?" And I had, and I laughed, and we basically both called bullshit on it right away, right? So you and I talked through, and that's the whole point of these podcasts is you and I are having these discussions anyway, and we talked through and found a little research to bolster our thoughts, our initial thoughts, and that's what we're going to talk about and help educate you along the process. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
You good with that, Manish?
Yep.
All right, rock and roll. So on that note, let's dive in. What is the article, right? What is the point of what we're talking about today? And that is a recent article from RIA Intel that discussed the Cerulli Associates report on how many advisors are retiring, right? And essentially, you and I both had the same thought, which is, wait a second, they keep saying the same thing over and over, which is, and I'm going to quote this article. Over the next 10 years, Cerulli estimates more than 111,500 advisors will retire, representing more than one-third of the workforce and assets. Well, if that is true, that is a monumental, it will have a monumental effect on all kinds of things. I just don't think it's true. How about you?
Yeah, well, shout out to RIA Intel and Mike Thrasher. I really dig this new site they got, and they do some fantastic reporting on our community. So if anyone, let's put that in the show notes to get to RIA Intel.
Absolutely.
I'm steady on that site. So,
Cool.
I know you have some stats. I had some anecdotal thoughts when I talked to you about the fact that I feel like I've heard this shit for 10 years. Boomer advisors are retiring. It's going to change the industry, yada, 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 yada. And here we are 10 years later saying the same stats over and over again. What did you dig up on the historical stats that people have released?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we just started with the quote from that article, right? And so I did some digging, and I'm going to give you two other pieces. There's a report I found in that reference, and again, we'll put this stuff in the show notes, so you can go read this boring information if you want. But in 2010, Cerulli referenced 320,000. I'm just rounding, 320,000 advisors, right? Another report I found in May of 2013 from Financial Advisor magazine discussing the Cerulli report, which, by the way, I actually do like the Cerulli report, but I'm going to read this sentence. Let's see if this sounds at all familiar. Over the next decade, 12 to 16,000 of the nation's 315,000 advisors and brokers will retire each year. Okay, so if 12 to 16, are retiring, each year for 10 years, that puts you in that 120 to 160,000 range, which is what they just said is 111,000 are retiring. Now, I'm going to simplify this. Here are the we just threw out a bunch of numbers. I'm going to make this real clear. In 2010, Cerulli said 320,000 advisors. In 2013, they said there are 315,000 advisors. In the report that just came out in 2019, they said there's 310,000 advisors. However, each time they're saying that we're going to lose 100,000 plus a year. Well, listen, you can't have both.
This is why people hate the media.
That's why we cried bullshit.
This is why people hate the media, because no one back tests. I know people don't like that word, but no one back tests their bullshit. Like if you're reporting a data and you have a headline clickbait, and we did a podcast on this where, they drag you in, and if you go back and look at it, they've said the same shit for years. And to me, and we talked about this, retiring is one of those things where you work at a power plant or you work at something that involves your hard labor, and after 40, 50 years of work, you just don't want to do it anymore. But an advisor or a service-related business, with technology, you're not a manufacturer and plant worker. You can work anywhere. You can do your job in any location. And so the concept of retirement just is not the same, right? And don't mention your rig at all in this conversation. Okay. But right, I mean, what is retirement in this case anyway?
Yeah. So here's this to me. This is one of the most simple examples that I've had in my career, and I see this all the time. But at my former role, I had one of my advisors call me, and he said, "I just want to run this by you," because he was so let's just say between 70 and 75, lived in a beautiful community. He golfed 3 4 times a week, traveled wherever he wanted, sometimes in a rig. Notice I didn't say my rig. You said I couldn't say my rig. He traveled in a rig. He also, went on vacations around the world. And basically, at that point in his career, his book, is a little over $100,000 a year in revenue to him. And it was 85% advisory, right? Using third party managers. I mean, this is such a simple book. He could do whatever he wanted, and his practice was built with decade old clients, right? People that he'd been working with for 10, 20, 30 years. So at some point, he calls me and he says, I just had an advisor offer me 400 grand for my book, and I'd have to stay on for basically 2 years to make sure everything kind of got moved over, and there's no problem. Should I do it? Why the hell would you do it? I mean, okay, so you get a $200,000 pop, I guess. You don't have to work the last 2 years of that period, but
there are ancillary things like if you have
health and
no, not just that. I mean, running the business is still, I have to do things every week that I find myself asking why the fuck am I still in this business when you're dealing with technology that doesn't work or payroll or state issues and there's things that pop up. So it's not, I don't think it's strictly a numbers game. But yes, to your point, if you are outsourcing everything and running a really efficient and lean practice, why would you take $400,000 when that's 4 years of revenue?
Right. Well, and this is where I think our conversation sort of makes another move, and that is away from just those numbers to the concept of the merger, acquisition, succession planning stuff. And I think, in my opinion, is we need to draw a line in the sand, and that line in the sand is the difference between what I'm going to call a sole practitioner and the bigger multi-person firms. Now, I'm not talking about an entire broker-dealer. You might be an advisor who works, who is maybe associated with a broker-dealer and does most daily advisory business through that corporate RIA. That's fine. But how many people do you have in your office? And I think there's a big difference between the person who either is by themselves, has one or two staff people, maybe one other advisor, but primarily their own, right? I said it's sole practitioner. And the group that has multiple advisors, the person who has multiple advisors underneath them, they've created this entire structure. Those are two different animals. And the TDA conference, I talked about that in one of our recent podcasts, right? They did all kinds of stuff on merger and acquisition, but it was all for the $400,000-$500,000, $400 and $500 million AUM practices. Well, those are multiple advisors typically and large staff, and I totally get that there's a place for that merger acquisition and for the top dog to retire because that business moves on. There are people there to support it. The sole practitioner, it's just not the same. And that's why I cry bullshit on this. Those people aren't retiring.
It's not a business, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Right. It's a lifestyle business. You're creating a situation where you're self-employed and it's not necessarily a business that's going to last 40, 50, 60 years. It's something that you created for yourself to run a good practice and enjoy your clients. And to your point, I think those aren't good acquisition targets, right? You have the person that never wants to leave or never wants to give up. You have a financial situation where there's no reason why that person should give up or leave. And so and this is why these numbers don't change, because most advisors, and this might be totally not true, but I think most advisors are sole practitioners. I don't have data to back that up, but that's something we should look into. But I think most advisors out there are sole practitioners, and so that's why the numbers aren't changing, because they're just simply not retiring because they don't want to. And to your point, I don't think anyone really wants to buy them.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic if you think about it like this. The book is a depreciating asset, and what I mean by that is if you had the two equal books, one is one is by a 55-year-old advisor and one is a 75-year-old advisor. If they're the same size, use the same solutions, and they both mirror image themselves, which I don't know about you, but most of the advisors I know if you look at the people who are their clients, they are a lot like themselves demographically. So wait a second, the revenue is exactly the same. I'm going to pay more for that younger advisor's book than I am the older advisor's book because people are more likely to die off, the assets go away. There's all kinds of reasons for that. And let's face it, who wants to go buy that older? There's just not as many people out there, or it's going to be a much smaller multiple. So the advisor who has the book wants the bigger multiple. And I just don't think you see as many deals in that scenario for that reason, right? Anyway, so I mean that's one step. It's just a different take, and I think we're going down that that same path together. We, like I said, we both on the phone we were laughing at the fact that we both had the same thoughts. So what about junior advisors? Do you have any thoughts about junior advisors in this spot of, well, why don't everybody talks about junior advisors coming up and buying the practice?
Well, so all right, let's take a personal example, right? I started at Potomac out of school, so this is the only real job that I've ever had, and I sort of grew in the ranks, and I had talks with former owners about buying into it and how to go about doing that. And in the early years, you don't have the money, so you are doing two things. You are approaching your senior advisor to say, let me buy a portion of the book, and also please finance it for me, right? So the person in that position is like, hold up. I'm selling you, a piece of revenue. In addition, I'm also going to finance it for you. Why don't I just keep that piece of the book? It's a difficult position to not only get someone to agree to sell you that, and then also self-financing. And I think a lot of senior advisors use it as a carrot to say, yeah, in another 5 years for sure, you can buy a piece. 5 years go by, they're busting their ass, working hard, the junior advisor. And you just keep moving the goalposts further away, and so I just don't think it's just a difficult situation unless the senior advisor truly wants to shut the door and walk away.
Yeah, I'll give some credit to David Grau, the one of the folks at FP Transitions, responsible for that business. And he referenced the 5-year rolling period, almost like a performance measure, and that's basically like you talk about, the senior advisor tells the junior advisor that in 5 years, we'll do this buyout, we'll get this done, and then suddenly 5 years rolls around and it's going to be another 5 years. I'm not quite ready yet, right? And then that one ends, and it just becomes this recurring thing where they're not quite done, not quite ready to stop yet, and it never happens. So I think as a junior advisor, you need to get something very solid in place at the near the beginning.
Well,
when you
listen,
you want that business.
I had nothing solid in place. I just sort of thought.
That's why it took so damn long.
Well, yes and no. Because I bought into a small percentage and then another one, and maybe it was a carrot, maybe it was So there was some transactions that were being done, but there was nothing formal about maybe the eventual takeover. And so, yeah, to your point, I think you have to get something solid. But if you put yourself in a senior advisor's shoes, that's a hard decision to make. Maybe their kids are young, or they still have to go through school, or there's still things they want to do. It's hard to say, in 5 years from now, I'm going to hand this business over. So I think both people are in a tough spot.
Yeah, they are, and there's now you mentioned self-financing. Can you speak to more of the bank loan? I think we're starting to see, just like more venture capitals coming in for the large merger acquisition stuff, I think we're seeing more bank opportunity for the junior advisor.
Yeah, and so once again, let's use my personal example. The first 10% I purchased was financed by one of the former owners, right? The second 10%, luckily, I was able to pay cash. And when I bought out the 80%, we were looking at financing again, or just doing a promissory note, and then it got introduced, the bank financing part of it. So I think in the past 5 years, there's been a huge influx of bank financing, whether it's through SBA loans or even these companies that focus in on RIAs. And that does open a whole new opportunity for people, because you can pay cash. You get the bank financing, you hand that advisor a check to buy out his shares. He's not on the hook for necessarily making sure revenue sticks around for 10 years or doing financing. So I think with that, I would have thought that more of these deals would have been done, because I think it is valuable if you can hand someone a check and say, look, you built a great business, leave. for both sides, right?
Yeah.
But it hasn't changed much, So, but the bank financing is definitely more available than it ever was in the past.
Yeah.
Probably because rates are so fucking low.
Yeah, there you go. Well, and that's really, I think, my takeaway is, number one, the premise itself is just, we've debunked it. But also, if you're a junior advisor, if your senior advisor talks about this sort of move but isn't willing to sell you bits of ownership over time, that's probably a clue that they're not really that serious about getting out of the game, right? I mean,
Well,
hey, as an
my
owner, I love
conclusion-
it when other employees are owners.
Yeah.
Because their skin is in the game. But it's not not everybody's in that position or wants to do that. I get it. So
I think the concept, this is my conclusion, is that the concept of retirement has changed. So the entire study is
Totally.
just bunk, right? If you're an advisor, you use third-party money managers, you outsource your tech, you outsource everything, you're just meeting with your clients and making sure that they're on their path for retirement. You can do that anywhere, and it doesn't take, hours on hours to do that. So just the concept of retirement makes this whole thing sort of a dumb statistic to begin with, probably.
yeah, and the reality is, nobody listening or watching this should be surprised that this is the conclusion, because let's face it, for regular people, your clients, retirement is changing, right? It's, I retire from my career and now I start that career that I always wanted to, or whatever. It's a totally different gig than it was 5 years ago.
Okay.
So anyway, on that note, you got any recommendations or other conclusions, other things?
I got some good recommendations actually. Right. We'll see. I just got it yesterday. So if you can see, I got these new Jabra Elite headset things in. So here's the backstory. Shout out to Justin Castelli with the Advisor Growth Community. He invited me on to do a presentation, and it's a Zoom presentation where you are on camera. And my current headset, looks like this.
For Zoom, and explain why that's your headset, even though we do these podcasts.
So
and nobody
believe it
ever
or not,
sees those.
AirPods don't actually work on computer unified communications. It doesn't work on your laptop.
Take those things back off, man.
No, I like them. They don't work on laptops. And so, if you're doing a Zoom presentation, you actually can't use AirPods. So Jabra actually is the only earbud company that makes the USB dongle that you can put in so they work on your laptop or desktop. And so when I did this presentation or webinar, I didn't want to wear these big ass headsets. So I just got them yesterday. They seem to be working okay. They're about $200. So hopefully I can test them some more and maybe have the staff all get them too.
Yeah, sweet. Now, just for clarity, they work because of the dongle, they work with the computer, as well as you can hook them to your phone and use them like any other headset?
Correct, yeah. So
Perfect.
This is about
being able to do them both.
It's weird that you would think that this technology would work on laptops, but apparently they don't unless you get that dongle. And so that's why you see these big old headsets when you're giving these presentations, and they look horrendous. Anyway.
Cool. All right. Well, mine's a little different. It's really simple, and that is I'm down in Lake Okeechobee, Florida, and I love to bass fish. And, I've gone out a couple of times in my kayak on my own, and that's all fine and dandy around some of the edge water and so forth. But look, when you travel around, and especially if you're going to a place where you're at new water and I don't get to fish a lot because I'm busy working, right? But when you do, just go pay for a guide.
You should
I've
retire.
done that twice. Yeah, there you go. That would be great. I think I shall. Give me a few years. But hire a guide, let them put you on the fish, and then you just knock them out right and left. Look, sometimes you're going to go get skunked. I've done that before. But overall, I think if you're going to new water, or you want to learn the new water to start with, not that you're going to steal the guide's spots, don't be that guy or that gal. But, again, pay the guide, let them take you out, let them explain what kind of grass that is, all that stuff. And you'll be smarter for it. It'll be worth your money. And then if you do go out by yourself, at least you're more prepared for that water to go fishing. So there you go. It's not a specific recommendation. It's a generic one, general one. But I think it's worth it. And I got my personal best twice for my bass fishing, and I'm a happy camper. Now I got to go kick it up another notch here in a few weeks.
Cool.
So, anything else?
That's it.
All right, rock and roll. Like, subscribe. We appreciate you listening.
That's
as well
two.
as
That's
watching.
two rock and rolls in one goddamn podcast.
Hey, I do what I do, but you know
See
what?
ya.
I haven't mentioned my rig once.
See ya.